Okay, I just had a coughing fit.
And I
Uh,
told him not to edit it out, man. I
okay,
told him not to, but I was overruled. So you
here
don't get to see Jubal choking.
maybe we'll keep. Yeah, I'm choking already. We'll keep it. We'll keep it in. Today we're talking about. We're actually going to take two episodes to talk about DOGE. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. This is something that's been all over the place in the news, and there's a paucity of understanding of what's actually happening at the administrative level, and also I think conceptually. So we're gonna talk about in this first episode on DOGE, we're gonna be talking about the legal aspects and some of the more administrative aspects of the department. On that, I know that Phil is going to know more than I do about that stuff, so we're going to be deferring to him here for the first episode. The second episode is going to be more about conflicts of interest, and sort of the mission of the department, how it's operating and what it's actually doing. And on that, I think we're going to have a bit more back and forth. Also, want to say the episode after these two Doge episodes, we're going to get a little bit more into the weeds on defining what authoritarian is. We're going to have a guest speaker come on, and we're gonna take a step back and see if we can put together a little bit better definition than what's out there right now. So that's just a tease for what's coming later. But for now, we're going to be focusing on Doge. Let's go straight to Dr. Phil Gusson and hear about the administrative. These are, if I've got this right, administrative issues that are potentially problematic with Doge. Does that sound
Okay,
right?
but before we do that, and first, I just want to explain to anybody who's listening. Thank you first. Thank you for listening. And as I said, I now know what this means. If you follow our channel when we post new things, you'll be notified of it. So I'm not going to say smash the like button or anything like that, but I will say if you follow the channel when we do upload things, you'll see them. So that's the first thing. The second thing I appreciate the Dr. Phil Guston thing, but a lot of this stuff is brand new to me. Like I had to research this to figure out what the hell was going on. And so if you're out there confused, join the crowd. We all are. Everybody's just trying to figure out what's going on. And so I just want to make it clear that this isn't like information that I have stored in my head. Before we do that, what I want to do is I want to talk to Jubal and get an idea of how he feels about some of the bigger issues surrounding Doge um, in particular. And so I'm really just going to grill him, and you guys can, if you have different views on this and you want to weigh in, we're always looking for comments, from what people who are taking the time to listen have to say. So first, general questions I'm going to put to Jubal. So what should be the basic rules for allowing government employees or DOGE detailees, is what they're called, access to information stored on government computers? Like, should anybody be able to have access? I'm assuming the answer is no. What should be the basic rule in your
Uh,
estimation, Jubal?
I mean, that's obviously that's a huge question, right?
Right.
I think that when you're talking about what Doge is actually doing, are they? I I don't see that this group of computer nerds that Elon Musk has hired to help him with this is going through, record by record and, reading people's stuff. I think what's happening is that they're aggregating the data and looking for trends, right? So in the same way, for instance, I would compare it to the NSA. That the NSA has, quote unquote, the right to look at our email, right? But they're not going through and reading our personal conversations. They're looking for particular pieces of language, right? They're looking for things that tie into to broader plots in an effort to ferret out terrorist activity, let's say. But even if they do find something that's problematic in a particular email, they need a warrant, right? And so I would say that Doge, in my estimation, is doing something similar to that, in that they are looking at aggregated records. They're looking at massive, huge amounts of data. They're not digging into one person's personal history so much as they're looking at trends across what huge swaths of people are doing. Now
Right.
that being said, it's still, you're still looking at personal data, right?
Right.
The question that I would have is, if we're going to limit the ability of the this department to look at uh, sensitive data, the question that begs to me is, well, what are the standards that are already in place, right? And maybe you know more about that. What kind of protections are already in place? Because there are a lot of government employees that already have the ability to look at our personal information, and
Right.
do have they been vetted to a degree that we're comfortable with?
Now, see, that's the thing. Is as far as I know, people who access to sensitive information is limited, very limited. But that the people who do have access to that information go through all kinds of privacy trainings. They go through all kinds of ethical trainings in order to go ahead and know how to properly handle that kind of data. I don't. I haven't seen. I've seen some reports and some court filings that have indicated that some of the DOGE employees haven't gotten that ethical training. And so I'm wondering if this is a group of people who, by my estimation, maybe you disagree with this, don't have a lot of government experience, that probably aren't very familiar with laws pertaining to privacy, how information can and can't be stored on a computer. Like I know as a professor, there's all kinds of rules around what kind of information I'm allowed to share. That when somebody is accessing payment system, social security, even if it's anonymous information, there's a potential. It seems to me there's a potential for problems. Um, or let me just ask the broader question: are you concerned about a lack of transparency?
So, and what I would say is, let's think about medical records, right? If you have a person's medical record and all of their personal medical history in a folder, that is a very, very different thing than the combined medical histories of everybody in the county. You know what I'm saying? Like, this total number of people that have had, taken heart medication, that are, receiving treatment for, whatever, various things. It's a very different thing to have somebody's personal record. Now, as far as my concern over whether or not the data security is good, in the sense that the data is protected, um, I would think that a group of computer nerds are probably going to be a lot better at protecting data than a group of bureaucrats, right? Now, do they?
The bureaucrats who run these systems are computer nerds.
Okay,
They're
that
the
might be
ones,
that might be true. That might
right,
be
right.
true.
See,
So,
my concern is that the bureaucrats, the nerdy bureaucrats, which may be redundant, but the nerdy bureaucrats have received the training. They're required to go to do trainings on privacy. They're
mm,
required to do trainings on what kind of information could be stored on a private computer, what kind of information could be shared, how that information could be moved around. It's, extensive training. Again, I'm using my example as a community college professor. I get all kinds of training on
right.
that. And so
So, I think that we're
one of the things that I'm concerned about, and it's not just because it's Doge, it would be anybody who isn't properly trained, that doesn't have the experience, that has access to large data set, um, but don't have the required training. My sense is that you're not as concerned about that as I am, or a lot of people are. Is that a
it,
fair
it's not
assessment?
it's not that I'm not concerned. It's that I don't I don't think either one of us know technically how either Doge or these bureaucracies have been going about protecting our data, right? Like, we're I think we're playing a guessing game at this point. So let me answer your question. Your question was about transparency. Do I think that they've been transparent so far? I would say yes. I think they've been maybe more transparent than we've seen in government in a long time. You can go to doge.gov and you can see all the stuff that they're working on. They're very open about it. At least they seem to be, unless they're just completely lying, which doesn't I don't think that they would be able to get away with that, but they seem to be very open about what they're talking or about what they're researching, what they're looking into, what they're finding. And so, am I concerned about transparency? No. Am I concerned about data security? Yes, of course. I'm always concerned about data security. I think that we have that our computer systems in this country are porous, and that there are a lot of problems with data security. With regards to individual people having the right kind of training in protecting documents, unless it becomes a question of do you trust that these guys are doing it in a way that's secure, or do you not? I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know how to get the information that we need to make that determination. So maybe you have a suggestion. How do we determine whether or not the process of researching all this stuff is as secure as we want it to be?
So how do we determine that? Now, I'm an institutionalist by nature. I suppose it has to do with, my job. So I tend to have faith in institutions. So I tend to think that the institutions themselves do a good job, not a perfect job, but do a good job of providing the necessary training that their employees need. Go ahead and protect our information. So I'm confident in the various agencies' ability to do that. When somebody outside the agency has access, um, that strikes me as alarming, and especially because they had quick access, immediate access. The red light that was set off in my mind was they couldn't possibly have had the training they needed to go ahead and learn all the rules about privacy, learning rules about how data can be stored and not stored, how it can be communicated, how to ensure that it's properly made anonymous, all those kinds of things. So that's the red light that went off for me, was that this was an um, unusual access to very sensitive information. And it happened very quickly. It didn't seem like there was any way that they could get the necessary training.
So let me just I interject really quickly. I don't disagree with that, but I would say that dealing with security in the private sector and in the public sector, that there's a lot of overlap, right? And so if these guys are software engineers, if they've been working in the electronic world for a significant amount of time, that they're going to understand data privacy concerns, how to protect data, the importance of not transmitting it in inappropriate ways. So that they don't have training that is specific to that particular bureaucracy may be true. Maybe they're not as versed on the particulars of the laws that are involved in not sharing information. But if there's just kind of a blanket, look, we're treating all this data as top tier protected data, then everybody comes into it with that kind of responsibility, that kind of understanding. That again, like I say, there's a lot of overlap in private and public sectors on keeping data secure.
And I would say actually the standards that the government sets are probably more severe, more, and so I don't think they're the same. I'm not willing.
What do you base that on?
I'm my own experience on how much training I get
Hmm.
on sharing data, right? And on sharing information. Like, we just get constant training on it all the time. It's a community college, right?
Mm,
It's a community college. And then because of my familiarity with people who are in the mental health profession, the requirements that they have, so psychologists, MSWs, things like that, there are the privacy requirements that they have to deal with are just really intense. And,
hmm.
and for good reason. I think that's fine. So my personal experience tells me that I know how much training you get by way of being a government official. Not I'm sure the private sector, for a variety of reasons, has their same protections, but I do think each agency has a different set of rules and different set of obligations, which is actually a perfect segue into getting into the judicial part and the administrative part of this. So we're going to move on from
Yeah,
here.
go ahead. I
Okay.
just to kind of put a bow
Okay.
around what we just talked about. I would say that we still lack information about whether or not Doge is as secure as it needs to be. Uh, if it comes out that it's not, I'll be there right there with you saying, we need to shore this up. But at this point, right now, I don't feel any more concerned with Doge having access to this sensitive data than I do with any other group of people having access to sensitive data.
And I would just say I'm very concerned about this. This is
Okay.
extremely troubling to me. I'm an institutionalist, and so I trust institutions probably more than Jubal does. But so now we're going to get into some serious into the weed shit, talking about the distinction between uh and I tried to think of a way to make this more comprehensible, but it's actually pretty hard to do. So there are two different things. There's something called an internal agency initiative, and then there's an advisory committee. Presidents are allowed to create each one. So an internal agency initiative is a program or a project that's launched by the president, um, and it's managed within a federal agency to improve its operation, right? They become part of the agency's internal structure and decision-making process. So in terms of transparency, an internal agency initiative, what that'll do is that'll follow the agency's internal rules and policies. So if DOGE is working within the Department of Energy, for example, whatever transparency requirements are, whatever reporting requirements are, record keeping requirements are, they would have to adhere. If they are an internal agency initiative, they would have to adhere to the rules that govern that particular agency. And I'll explain this a little bit more in a second. They're not subject to the external transparency laws as specified in the Federal Advisory Committee Act, the FACA. I'll talk about that in a second. An advisory committee is something different, again created by the president, and any president can do this. They are a separate body that's established to provide guidance and recommendations to the agency itself, to an agency or agencies, but they don't have direct decision making authority. Their role is to provide expert opinions, and so because it's important that we know what advice presidents are getting, right? Advisory committees, according to the FACA, um, have to operate with a high level of transparency, including public meetings, documentation, all those kinds of things to ensure that accountability. And so we know what's going on. Now, it's important to keep in mind that some advice given to the president could be secret. One, there may be national security information that you don't want public, right? Additionally, we want presidents to be able to get honest, frank advice. And if people, when they're giving advice to the president, um, think that their advice might become public, they might hold back and not say what they actually think. And so there are reasons for the advice that a president gets not to be transparent. That makes sense. Any president. But there are rules around these different kinds of bodies that the president could create. Now, DOGE was actually established as an executive order as a temporary organization as part of the U.S. Digital Service. Now, if you've never heard of the U.S. Digital Service, join the crowd because I had no idea what it was. So the U.S. Digital Service was actually created in 2014 by the Obama administration as an internal agency initiative designed to modernize government technology and improve digital services. This internal agency initiative was created after the debacle of the healthcare.gov rollout that turned out to be, a disaster. And so the goal of the U.S. Digital Service, its primary goal, was to recruit top technological talent from the private sector um, to drive efficiency within federal agencies. And so because it was created as a sort of an updated version of the US Digital Service, it seems then that it is would probably be properly be characterized as an internal agency initiative, right? Not an advisory group. Now, when the US Service was created, um, there were some people a small group of people who were troubled by the lack of transparency of this advisory group. But there weren't any lawsuits filed, anything like that. Um, the reaction to what's happened with DOGE has been much different. And the US Digital Service wasn't going into individual records as a result of, being told to do what they're trying to do is eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. So I think that's one of the things that the courts are going to have to deal with. Um, there have been a number of court cases filed that argue that DOGE is essentially functioning as a federal advisory committee and is failing to meet the transparent record requirements as per the FACA. But like I say, it doesn't. It looks like it was created as an internal agency initiative, and so we'll have to wait and see what the courts say about what its proper role is. And so I don't, again, I know that's a lot of complex information, but I do think that one of the things we want to do with Into the Weeds is get into the weeds, get into the details. And this winds up being, um, it's a way of hopefully explaining what is going on in the court system and what the courts are going to be dealing with and the things that they're going to be um, trying to wrestle with. Is that what is this thing? What is this agency? Go ahead, Jubal.
So that's no, that's good. Sometimes when you get into the weeds, the best thing to do is to chop them down, right? So let's make it simple. An internal advisory committee or an internal agency initiative is something that is inside the agency and then is subject to those agency rules, right?
Correct.
An advisory committee is something that is outside the scope of any particular agency and that reports to the president.
Yeah, or and it can also make recommendations to agencies, but it's not confined to. It's not
Right,
required to
but
follow
that's
the
those are
yeah
the two basic things.
the basic yeah.
Right. So the question becomes is what Doge doing valuable? Does it have value? Going in, ferreting out, shining a flashlight on all the spending. I mean, is there value to that? I think that there is. I think there's tremendous value, even if we don't change anything, right? Even if we decide we're going to keep all the spending that we have, knowing that it's there and having an earnest accounting and audit of all the spending that's happening, um, I think is only positive. Transparency is only positive in a democracy, I would say, unless you're
Right.
dealing with national security, secrets.
But it matters how it's done. It
Okay,
does matter
and
how
that
it's done.
maybe that's the issue here,
To
is
me,
that as
right.
an institutionalist, you're concerned with the minutia of how these things are done, and then as somebody who's more of a commercialist, I'm more interested in what's getting done, right? And I think that's going to be the division on this issue going forward is are we going to be sticklers for all these rules it because it was part of the US Digital Service when it was launched, which is an internal agency initiative, it can't act like an advisory committee. Is that really the best argument against Doge?
Well, I think as somebody who's an institutionalist, I think it's important. I do think it's important to follow the rules and the guidelines that are
Mhm.
established in law. These are established by Congress,
No, I
right?
get it. I
And
get
so
it. And I
and
would
so
say, go
yeah,
ahead.
I think everybody agrees with the idea that getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse is a good idea.
Mhm,
That should be done. But I think it also has to follow the law. If
mhm.
and if they don't like the law, the Republicans control the White House, the House, the Senate. Change the law. Change the
Sure.
law.
So
But
let's say
to
this.
me, the proper way you go ahead and ferret out waste, fraud, and abuse. You can have Doge do the things that they're doing, but one, they get the proper training. If they're working within the agencies, they adhere to the rules that are established by the agency. They don't ignore them. And then two, what they do is they make recommendations to the relevant subcommittees who have jurisdiction over those agencies and let it go through the legislative process. Let them be the ones that go ahead and do the work. right? Then it's not just somebody coming in and doing a slash and burn approach. It's somebody doing a careful, thoughtful analysis of where we can ferret out waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think if it's done that way systematically, it's going to have broad bipartisan support. There's going to be disagreement over where and how much cuts should be made, but at least there wouldn't be concern about the process. And that's the concern, because some of the people who've expressed concern about DOGE's activities have been people who worked for Donald Trump,
I
right?
understand.
Um,
So let me just say, it seems like the process argument that you're making, and
mhm,
correct me if I'm wrong. The
okay,
process argument that you're making is that Doge was founded under the uh, Digital Act, 2014 Digital Act, which makes it an internal agency structure, not an advisory committee,
right.
right? So if it was to come out tomorrow and announce itself as an advisory committee, then your argument would go away.
Right. And if it turns out that they're not adhering to those rules, my argument would be rock solid.
What rules?
Okay, so for example, in the initial effort for the DOGE to access what's called the Bureau of Fiscal Service payment system, right? The acting Secretary of Treasury, a guy named David LeBrick, when they tried to get access to the payment system, he had told the transition team that granting DOGE access was unlawful. He said it. This is somebody who is a Trump appointee, somebody who was part of the administration. What happened is after Secretary Besson was nominated after he was confirmed, he then placed LeBrecq on administrative leave, and then he granted DOGE access for the payment system. Now, to me, that's problematic. You have somebody who's serving in a capacity as acting Secretary of the Treasurer. He's enforcing the rules. He says it's unlawful. He gets replaced, and the Secretary overrides him and gives them access. That to me is problematic,
What made it
right?
unlawful?
Because I think what he said and what the lawsuit that was subsequently filed said was that the giving them access violated the Privacy Act of 1974, and it also violated the Internal Revenue Code with respect to taxpayer information. These are again more into the weeds stuff, right? But that's what he said was that's what the lawsuit said was unlawful. So when somebody goes ahead and says, wait, this is not right, and they are terminated, essentially put on administrative leave, that sets off alarms in my head. It tells me that somebody is saying this is unlawful, that they were told it was unlawful during the transition. And it seems like Secretary Besson just decided, I don't care.
So it's
That,
unlawful. It's unlawful according to the 1974 Privacy Act. Do you know what particular statute was violated?
yeah. So boy, you told me to cut down the weeds, Jubal. Now you're saying like fertilize them,
I'm
water them,
I'm
and
I'm
let them
just
grow.
fascinated. I'm fascinated by this. I mean, this is a completely bureaucratic argument, but now I'm fascinated by it. Go ahead.
Okay, so according to the Privacy Act, um, this is getting into details. I'm sorry, people. He asked me a question.
Blame me.
Whenever a system of records is established or revised, any agency that changes the system wants to publish what's called the System of Records Notice in the Federal Register. The Federal Register is sort of where you go ahead and post things when there's going to be a change in administrative law. Administrative law are the sort of the things that bureaucrats do, not
Right.
what Congress does. It's called a SORN, a System of Records Notice. And according to the Privacy Act, at least 30 days before there's a change in the record system, something has to be published, a SORN has to be published in the Federal Register to notify people of any changes. That gives people who object to the changes an opportunity to go ahead and register complaints about this change in policy. That wasn't done. I mean, they were trying to get access to the records within days of Trump's inauguration. So that's the first
Do you have any idea
part.
what happens to those complaints
There,
if
there,
somebody
but
complains?
if somebody complains, the agency will head it up. I don't know if that's one of the things that the inspectors general would do, would to look if there was violations of the law within the agency's rules, whether inspectors generals would be the ones who would go ahead and do that. But as we know, when one of the first things that Trump did is he fired a whole bunch of inspectors generals of the various agencies, the people who are the watchdogs, the people who are legally their job is to look for waste, fraud, and abuse. It's almost like he wanted to get those people out of the way. And then as far as the Internal Revenue Code with respect to taxpayer information, Section 6103, I apologize, provides that returns and return information has to be confidential. It can't be disclosed unless authorized by statute, and that officers, employees of the Department of Treasury can access and return the information in their official duties. This is a quote from the language. If their official duties require such inspection and disclosure of tax information. Well, if they're an internal, if they're, I know, if there's a, you asked,
I
if they're an internal agency initiative, then they are required to adhere to uh, the rules that everybody else in the department is required to adhere to. And so in the Department of Treasury, that would mean following the tax code.
Okay, so that
Now this
means
is just this is just
not releasing tax information. In other words, keeping data secure, which is something we already talked about. The thing is that if you want to alter the bureaucracy, you have to let the bureaucracy know. You have to give the bureaucracy 30 days notice, so that
no,
people within the bureaucracy.
if the bureaucracy wants to change rules, they have to notify it in the public register so that
Mhm.
any interested parties.
Is the SORN public?
Yeah. So the Federal Register is where when the bureaucracy wants to change a rule, they're called rules, not laws.
Mm,
Sometimes they're referred to as administrative laws. When they want to change a rule, they post it in the Federal Register. That is public. And then any interested parties have an opportunity to comment on it. And
mm.
then before it becomes finally enacted. So then in theory, the agency or the department would go ahead and listen to the complaints and either respond to them, or not, depending on
Right.
how they
So
felt.
if DOGE is an advisory committee, are they subject to the same particulars?
No, as an advisory committee,
So again, so
they
everything
would
that you
just,
just said, all of that garbage that you just said, if DOGE is an advisory committee, none of it matters
if DOGE was an advisory committee, they wouldn't have access to that information.
unless the
And this,
president gave it to them.
ag- well, I think that may be true. I think that may be true. But then that raises another question. If the president is going ahead and giving them security clearance without knowing anything about them, without running them through the FBI, without doing a background check, that is a national security concern.
Mm.
That is a national security concern, in my estimation.
So again, this goes back to data security. So if we were to have something, let's just fantasize for a moment.
Okay.
If we were to have a situation where all the people working in DOGE were to pass a security check, were to you know be verified as capable of handling confidential data, would that solve your problem with Doge?
100%.
Okay.
I mean, as far as that concerned, so
Mine
if
too, actually. So that's actually an interesting point of agreement is that um, it seems like what we're really saying here is you. I feel like, honest appraisal, I feel like you're concerned that Doge does not have the proper respect for the rules that are in place in these bureaucracies that are intended to protect data from being released, right? That they're coming in with a sledgehammer and a chainsaw and just not being serious about any of the protections. Uh, but if somehow Doge was able to show that they were in fact being extremely careful with the data, that would go a long way to assuage your concerns on that issue.
100%.
Okay, I
As long as if they got the same training that everybody gets in those departments, if they had it were
or similar training.
Well, it should be everybody should basically get the same training, but the relevant training, so they don't need training on what things that are going to be relevant to what their task is, right? So,
Hmm.
but access to information should all be the same. So if they got the relevant training and they were subjected to the same oversight that other employees are, then yeah, then that concern would go away. And I think the important thing is that whether whether we find their access problematic or not should have nothing to do with what their goal is. So in other words, if another administration comes in with a decidedly left leaning and what they want to do is they want to access information because they want to find things that don't fit with their ideological programs that don't fit with their ideological sort of orientation, those people shouldn't get access just because they are in line with the president's thinking. The rules are the rules, and they're designed to protect everybody. And so I think we should do is avoid saying, I like their mission, so therefore I'm not alarmed by their access to information.
Okay,
I don't
that's
care
fair.
about, okay,
That's fair. I think that's good. And I think that that's kind of a I think that's a universal point of agreement. I think that people on both sides can be in agreement that whether you agree with the mission of Doge or not, that they need to treat confidential data carefully, right?
a
And
hundred percent.
we as the people who are in charge of this whole mess need to be updated on what are you doing? What are you doing to make sure that the data is being kept safe? I recognize that you know the bureaucratic rule mongering, I guess you could say, with regards to internal agency initiatives versus advisory committees is a little impervious to understanding, but I get that that's the argument that bureaucrats are going to make, right? It's like
Yeah, yeah,
bureaucrats are going to argue from where they are, and
right.
so if there can be a simple uh, change in presentation that you can say, okay, Doge is now an advisory committee, and then subject to all the transparency requirements of an advisory committee. And so far, as I said, if you go to doge.gov, you can see all the stuff they're working. They seem to be very transparent. Now I can change my mind on that if I choose to later, but they seem like they're being good about that. Um, but the big stick in the mud right now seems to be that we haven't been assured that Doge is treating the data that it is encountering in all these different agencies as carefully as it should across the board. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying let us know, right? Just tell
Right.
us that, and
And,
I think that's a good point.
and good. And I'm glad we agree. And you guys, this, I know we've talked about this before in other videos. This is a thing. Jubal and I disagree on a lot, right? But when we talk about things, there are areas of agreement that we can find, right? He's concerned about privacy. I'm concerned about privacy. Those are things that we can agree on. And when we can forge consensus like this, and then in theory, communicate it to our lawmakers and say, do something about this, right?
Right.
This
So
is what we're concerned about. Right,
by Phil and I being on the same side on this issue and saying, look, we've unified our demand, right? We've taken the two sides, put them together, and said, okay, here's what we need as a unified voice, left and right. What we want is assurances from you that this and an explanation, not just an assurance, but an explanation of how you're making sure that this data is being kept safe. I don't think that's too much to ask. And I think that if that was to happen, it seems like it would satisfy both sides, right?
100%.
That's why we do what we do. So the next episode of Doge is going to get a little bit more into the weeds on a different side of it, right? Do you want to talk about it, Phil?
Yeah, so the next thing we're going to talk about are going to be some of the concerns about the conflict of interest, in particular with Elon Musk um, and his business interests, and then the role that he's playing in sort of making recommendations to that. So we're going to start off explaining what Doge actually is and what it isn't, because I think there's a tendency for people to think that it has more power and authority than it actually has. It is, as I'll explain when we start the next video, it is not a department. like the Department of State or the Department of Treasury. They just gave that cool name for marketing reasons, but it's not a department. And as such, it doesn't have any ability to enforce decisions. All it can do is make recommendations. It's ultimately up to the various agencies and departments to either follow or not follow those recommendations, as we saw recently. And that's what we're going to get into in the next video.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you for the next one.